our critical mass here for a quorum. If you're ready to get started.
Sure, Stephen. I want to welcome everyone to the Washington County Coordinating Committee for Monday, November 15th, 2021. Meeting is scheduled to be noon. We're running a couple minutes late, but we got it started, and it's scheduled to run for a couple hours. We've got first up on our agenda today, we have visitor comments. And I think we've got one visitor comment, Stephen?
We do. Actually, maybe, yeah, let's go ahead and take care of that. This is someone who may be familiar to some of you. His name's Roy Rogers. And let me make sure that, sorry, we're having some logistical challenges here today.
I already made him a panelist, Stephen.
Yes,
Sorry.
Commissioner Rogers, go ahead. Commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much. For the record, my name is Roy Rogers. I'm a Washington County Commissioner. I represent District 3, which is the southeast quadrant of the county. Nice to see so many friends and acquaintances on this meeting. I want to talk about MSTIP. You're going to have on your agenda item 6, and that's going to deal with much the same thing that the county board dealt with in a meeting at the end of September, 9/21 to be exact. What my comments are going to be is I'm not asking to change the system of countywide interests. We've dealt with that many years in a row, and that's certainly the purview of this particular group. I'm also not suggesting that we change the project eligibility criteria. But what I see on the horizon, and you may all see it different, is I see that we're going to continue to have increased inflation. Most networks, if you watch those, are seeing somewhere in the area of 6+%, and that's a seasoned average, which means that some things are 10 or 12 and some things are 1 or 2. I believe construction costs are going to go up significantly. I also believe that bond interest rates are going to go up. They're very low at this point, 2 to 4%. If you have inflation at 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10% on the construction side, and you can bond at 2 or 4%, now's a good time to borrow money. So what I'd ask Mr. Chair and members of the group at some point, I know it may not be today, but maybe it's your December meeting, that you look at considering 2 things. One, consider the question of bonding some projects in each of the cities. I see it here, quite familiar with your systems, and I know what you need. And if we would bond a lot of these projects, we're going to save a lot of money. And I think the time's right now. The other thing that I would ask you to consider is that you take a look at the Opportunity Fund. That's historically been a very, very successful program, wildly successful, particularly for the small cities, because they can borrow money from that fund and in essence get a grant and do projects that they couldn't do without that fund. As you all know, there's a big infrastructure bill at ODOT level. You're going to hear about that today probably. They're putting it in various buckets. There hasn't been any analysis or comments yet in regard to whether there'll be any match. I suspect that'll come up at Region 1 and others, but it's a good time to put money in the Opportunity Fund. So I understand from our staff, and Stephen, thank you for your note, that we're still paying off the old debt, but that's kind of like your house. Many people have a house that they're buying and they're putting debt up. I understand that there's going to be a payments from time to time for those into the future, but my bones are telling me this is the right time, like we did back when Tom Bryan, so that's been back several years ago when he was chair. We bonded these high growth areas, and they've been accelerating the project. So I will just simply stop, Mr. Chairman, saying if you can borrow money at 2 or 4%, and you're going to save 6 to 10 to 12% on your cost, now is the time to really look at doing that. And my ask is that this group at some point discuss this and see whether or not the Opportunity Fund can be expanded as well as bonding I will bring this to our commission. We've been off for a couple of weeks, or are off for a couple of weeks. I'll bring it up at our next meeting to look at it. I've talked to at least one other commissioner who thought that this was a great idea. So I will stop there, and thanks for the time. I'll go off camera.
Thanks, Commissioner Rogers. Appreciate your insight and your suggestion. We'll work that into the grind of opportunities we're working through. Okay, that takes us into introductions in preparation for roll call. I see I have three folks covering today. I saw Councilor Rosner is here covering. I also saw Council President Ackerville is here, and Councilor Tim Rippey.
Yep. And it looks like Commissioner or Councilor Pace may be sitting in for Mayor Callaway.
Yep,
That's correct.
All right, great.
Steve, you want to go through roll call then?
Yep, I'll run through and just make sure we've got the right folks here. I see Mayor Jones for Banks,
Here.
Mayor Beatty for Beaverton, Mayor Delane, Mayor Sherrado, Councilor Rippey for Forest Grove, Councilor Pace for Hillsborough,
Here.
Mayor Gibson, King City, Mayor Linehan for Plains, Council President Rosner for Sherwood, Mayor Snyder for Tigard, Mayor Bubenik for Tualatin, Council President Ackerval for Wilsonville, Commissioner Fye for Washington County, and we have both Councilors Rosenthal and Gonzalez for Metro. And then for ODOT, we have Kate Hawkins, I believe. Yep, sitting in for Matt Freitag today. Thanks for being here. And can our team tell me, do we have someone from TriMet today? I don't think we do. Okay. Oh, you're muted, Chris, but no.
No, we don't.
Okay, great. All right. Have I missed anyone? All right. Thank you all.
Well, Steve, it sounds like we definitely have a quorum.
We do.
Okay, let's start the meeting. Also, we'll be, as I previously mentioned, we'll be doing 2 hours today. That's an opportunity to give some time to discuss. We got a lot of meaty subjects to go over today. So if anybody is going to have a problem with staying from 1:30 to 2, give us a holler. And based on feedback from last month, I will try to get us out here a few minutes before the hour. Okay. First up on our agenda, consideration of the Washington County Coordinating Committee meeting summary for October 18th, 2021. Any adjustments, changes? Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
I got a motion, a second. I'm not sure who I got the motion or the second from. Steve, do you got
Mayor. Mayor Lanahan, I made
Oh,
it
Terry.
first.
Okay. Terry got the
was-
motion, and I'll give the second to
I was.
Councilor Rosener. Thank you. Any further discussion, updates? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any against? Any abstentions? Sounds like it passes unanimous. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, that takes us into our first option, which is the TDT expenditure request. I cannot make my tongue work today. That's actually going to be Aaron Wardell. I think you're going to be presenting that one today.
I am. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Erin Wardell, Principal Planner for Washington County. We have 2 TDT expenditure requests, both from the city of Hillsborough. The information is in your packet. Hillsborough is asking for $100,000 in TDT funds for Southeast Century Boulevard between Dogwood and Maine, and then for $1.66 million for Northeast 25th Avenue between Cornell Road and Northeast 28th. Both of these projects are eligible for TDT expenditure, and the WCCC TAC recommended approval at their November 4th meeting.
Great. Usually these are pretty, to use the term that Royal is used, pretty perfunctory. Is there any questions, comments? Otherwise, we could go directly into move to approve. Sounds like no questions.
I move to approve as presented, both projects.
Great. Motion by Mayor Schneider. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second, I'm going to give it to Councilor Jones. Mayor Jones, sorry, Mayor Jones. Okay, motion and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Looks like we got another unanimous, Steve. Okay, that takes us into TDT project list amendment proposals. Also again with Aaron.
I'm back. You're going to be seeing me a lot today.
That's okay.
So we have some proposed amendments to our TDT project list. This list is important because it guides the credit eligibility for development projects on our roads, and it also makes these projects eligible for us to spend our TDT funds on. We update the project list about every year, but we can do it more or less often depending on when cities or the county need projects to be added to the list. So at this time, we have some proposals from the cities of Beaverton and Tualatin and from Washington County, and these are summarized in the packet. Beaverton is proposing to remove one project on Crescent. They are proposing some amendments to their description of the Western Avenue project. They're proposing adding Watson from Hall to Farmington. Tualatin is proposing to add Boone's Ferry at Mahogany for an intersection improvement. And then Washington County is proposing to add Blanton Street from 209th to 170th. This is a future complete street with an on-street trail project for us. And then on the transit list, Washington County is proposing to add the Council Creek Regional Trail. This one's particularly important as we try to seek federal funding for this project for us to be able to contribute local share through TDT. So that's a quick overview of the proposed amendments.
Anyone have questions for Aaron? Okay, maybe I'm the only one that looked at Blanton. Really? The frontage road, Blanton?
It's an important east-west collector connecting South Hillsborough to Beaverton.
Wow. Apparently I need an imagination expansion because having lived in this area for almost 30 years, I just couldn't see Blanton filling that role.
Yeah, I think the nature of the roadway has changed in some cases. It's now one of the through routes into and out of South Hillsborough. So we've actually seen some pretty significant upticks in traffic, certainly on the western portions of the roadway, and anticipate that will continue as development in South Hillsborough continues, and it will become a more important parallel route to TV Highway just for capacity issues. And it's also one of the identified routes for at least near-term improvements related to the TV trail, which would provide a bike pedestrian alternative to using TV Highway. So we think for both of those reasons, it's a pretty important connection. And as Aaron said, does run between the city of Beaverton and the city of Hillsborough.
And it was upgraded to a collector in the county's TSP in 2014 as a result of South Hillsborough planning and outcomes of the TV Highway corridor study.
And need we forget it's also the only way to get to Nona Melius.
The most important piece.
Right. Thanks, Beach. I'm glad I wasn't the only one that recognized that the joke nature of that. Okay,
I'm
great.
with you.
Okay, any other questions besides my goofy ones?
See Mayor Linehan.
Oh, yep, Mayor Linehan, yeah, popped up. Terry.
Hi, yeah, thanks a lot. So I guess I need some clarification. So is this recommendation, is county looking for the recommendation from WCCC today to move this on to the BOC? Need some clarification on that.
Yes, the WCCC makes the recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners.
So I believe it was Mayor Snyder asked at the last meeting for a city council briefings from staff, and staff agreed to get that out to the WCCC. And I believe it is reflective in our minutes as well. And in all fairness too, before I think this recommendation should go to the BCC, not all the cities have had an M-STIP presentation from county. For example, tonight at our city council meeting, we will have the presentation tonight. So North Plains does not have an opportunity to give their thoughts or any additional input on this list. You see what I mean? It seems backwards.
I think we're jumping ahead to the next agenda item a little bit. So this is the Transportation Development Tax System Development Charge Project Eligibility List. It's not related to the Major Street Transportation Improvement Program. So it's two different things. This is the list of projects that we are able to spend our TDT revenue on.
Yeah, so it's a different conversation from the MSTIP eligibility, as Aaron was saying. This is really just eligibility for the county or cities to expend their TDT funds on specific projects.
So, but okay, but I mean, I was thinking that this MSTIP, the eligibility criteria is something that we will be reviewing this evening, and so if you're asking for the board today, the WCCC, to make a recommendation to the board on this particular amended list.
For the Transportation Development Tax Program, yes.
Okay.
The next item on the agenda, we'll be talking about MSTIP, and you're correct. North Plains is the last of our city council briefings for MSTIP, and that is happening this evening. So North Plains has not yet had that briefing on MSTIP.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I think, Terry, that's the big difference, right? It's the TDT versus the MSTIP.
Well, and I just want to make sure that we that it's equitable for all cities to be able to give their feedback on the MSTIP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we certainly understand. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, would anyone entertain the motion to approve?
So moved, Councilor Pace.
I have a motion by Councilor Pace. Do I have a second?
Second by Councilor Rippey.
Second by Councilor Rippey. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
I got Mr. Gibson, Mayor Gibson. Do I have you in the opposed?
No, I said aye.
Okay, just
I was just-
my
I was
timing. I
just
may have jumped
late.
in there too fast. Okay, all right. Thanks. That's why I was clarifying. Okay.
No, I'm just slow, that's all.
Slow on the mute, but that's okay. Probably safer that way for you. We got no nays that I'm hearing. Anybody abstaining? Sounds like no abstentions at this time. Okay, let's get into one of the more meat and potatoes part of it. The MSTIP 2328 System of Countywide Interest Map. Aaron's going to take us through that. The process for seeking changes to the map, right? The purpose of the map, of the TAC recommendations and the TAC discussion, including we did have a couple votes against the recommendation and interest in the map to reflect needs and consider adding local collectors if they are in a center or an employment area. Aaron will also introduce the questions and other eligibility criteria. Want to take this moment before we jump into this to remind us, previously this is, and as it's named, the Major Streets Transportation Improvement. So other sources of funding have come historically from TDT, as we just previously had some reviews on, RFFA, grants, local funds. I think we need to offer our comments with the board, with the dissenting views, right? We did have some definitely some different views on how this should be used. Ask about our eligibility criteria and our comments thereof. And want to let Aaron get started on this.
Thank you, Mayor Delane. I do want to note, Mayor Linehan brought up that we promised to provide a summary of all of our city council briefings to the WCC as well. Since North Plains hasn't happened yet, we haven't finished preparing that. And so we will intend to have it ready for your next meeting. So you'll be able to review the notes from all of the city council briefings.
So
Next
this is
slide.
not our last and only bite at this.
The city council briefings are more about the program in general and kind of the overall, what we intend to do with MSTIP, the purpose of the program, the history of the program. It doesn't necessarily relate just to the eligibility criteria. So if it is the will of the WCCC to wait until after our plans to make a recommendation, we could choose to do that. But we haven't explicitly asked the city councils to give a thumbs up approval of the eligibility criteria either. It's been more a briefing and discussion purpose.
Thanks for clarifying, Erin.
Next slide, please. So the purpose of the briefing today is to share proposed updates to the system of countywide interest map, review and discuss proposed map amendments and the other eligibility criteria, and then request your recommendation to the Board of Commissioners on the proposed map amendments and eligibility criteria. Next slide. So the system of countywide interest map has been used to identify major streets that are eligible for MISTIP expenditure. The map as originally created included all arterials, all urban arterials, and some rural in the county, and then some collectors that were determined to serve more of a regional benefit. Next slide. As a part of starting out this next allocation of MISTIP, we wanted to take the opportunity to review the map and make sure that it still reflects our best understanding of the major streets in the county. And so we put it out there to members of the WCCC TAC. And we've been talking about this with other stakeholders as well to make sure that we have the map as complete as possible. We received 31 proposed map amendments from Banks, Tigard, Forest Grove, North Plains, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Sherwood, and from Washington County. This was quite frankly many more than we were expecting. We thought starting out that the map was a pretty good reflection of the major streets in the county, so we were surprised to see this many. The county came up with a set of evaluation criteria to help us determine which of these should be added to the map. And so the criteria we came up with were, is it adopted in a plan? Not everything that was proposed to us is adopted in a plan. Is it an arterial or collector? We had at least one neighborhood route in there. Does it serve multiple jurisdictions? Kind of getting at, is it serving a regional function? What are the traffic counts on that facility? Are there any forecasted volumes for this facility when we look at our models? Is it serving a regional function in other ways? And then is it identified on the RTP map of the regional bike network? Next slide, please. So based on our evaluation using that criteria, county staff recommended the approval of 7 of the proposed updates. Lombard Street in Beaverton, which continues an existing designation of Lombard on the map. Highway 47 in Forest Grove is a rural segment of an arterial that's connecting parts of Forest Grove, so it makes a lot of sense to add that piece to the map. Huffman Street in Hillsborough is an urban arterial and therefore should be on the map. Blanton Street's coming up again, Mayor Delane. It links 3 jurisdictions, identified as an on-street interim trail connection for the TV trail. Barrows Road, which serves 2 jurisdictions. It was proposed by both Tigard and Beaverton, and provides parallel capacity to Shoals Ferry. Ice Age Drive, which is a future collector connecting Sherwood to Tualatin through the Tonkin employment area. And then Hillsborough proposed actually removing a couple of facilities from the map that they didn't feel really did reflect that regional major collector kind of a function. And so that's Dawson Creek Drive and Chute Road east of Brookwood Parkway. Next slide, please. We had a really robust discussion at the TAC. And a lot of that.
Erin, can I ask a question?
Yes, Commissioner Fye.
Okay. And actually, I was gonna see if Council President Rosner is still here.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. In terms, if you could go back the last slide, in terms of Sherwood, I know when we did the tour, there were multiple roads that were identified that you were hoping to get on this map. Was that the most important one, Rosner?
The most of the roads of concern are on the map already, like Edie Road and Elward and Brookman. But Ice Age is an add, Ice Age Drive through the TEA. So yes, that I think we're in good shape. But thank you for asking.
Thank you. And please jump in if there's other questions as I'm going through this. Next slide. So as I said, we had a really robust discussion at the TAC, and a lot of that discussion was around what does it really mean to serve a regional function? And so we talked a bit about including more collector facilities, particularly those that are in town centers or regional centers. It was a really good discussion, and there was some support for really broadening the scope of what we're including on this map. But we weren't sure that we had the direction to go forward with that. We did hear encouragement for the county to consider criteria other than just trip counts in our staff proposal. And so that's why we added the RTP regional bikeway designation as one of our criteria. It didn't change the recommendation that we ended up making, but we did include that. You can see that recommended, or you can see that included in the packet. In addition to that conversation and hearing encouragement about adding more roads to the map, we also heard support for keeping it kind of as it is and really keeping it reflecting those major streets. There's a lot of need already reflected on the map, and that's really what it comes back to, is that we already have a lot of need out there. Keeping the focus on major streets reflects that. So in the end, the vote was 7-2 to support the staff recommendation to the WCCC, and the 2 who voted against that recommendation really did want to see more collectors included in that. County staff feel that if we do want to go that direction and include more, then we need to have that conversation with all of our cities and make sure that it's a really comprehensive discussion. It could be a part of a bigger discussion about what this map means in general. Maybe there's some use for this map beyond just the MISTIP program. And I think that's a conversation that we can have, but we could have that possibly outside of this round of the MISTIP allocation cycle. Next slide. So this map shows all of the proposed map updates, all 31 of those proposals around the county. A couple of them are not yet adopted into plans, and so we were not able to reflect them on the map because the alignment doesn't exist. And so those are summarized, but they're not necessarily shown here. Next slide. And then this map shows the staff recommendations. So you can see those 6 proposed or 7 proposed kind of spread out around the county where they're located. Next slide. So that's actually it for the discussion of the map specifically. This slide is summarizing kind of that other eligibility criteria, and we're looking for the WCCC's recommendation on this as well. So kind of 2 parts, recommendation on the map proposal and then a recommendation on the overall eligibility criteria. So the past criteria, and this is what we've been talking to people about, were that the project has to meet multimodal needs, has to be located on one of those roads of countywide significance on the map, has to be ranked as a high local priority, which we interpret as is adopted into a plan document by the cities or the county. And then that overall, the program needs to be geographically and financially balanced, which means that no one project in one place can use all of the MISTIP funding, right? We have to have some geographic balance in there for how we're doing this. Next slide. So action requested, make a recommendation to the board on the map updates, and then make a recommendation to the board on the other eligibility criteria. And we can pause here before we talk about the next steps, or we could go into the next steps.
Esteemed group, do you have some feedback, questions, comments? Oh, there's Mayor Jones. Mayor Jones.
So I'm curious what happens to all of the roads that did not receive the county staff recommendation. Is this list going to be used for something else, or will it be saved and maybe this can be edited, next year or the year after? What is that kind of timeline?
We would intend to preserve all of the records. A big part of the reason we're doing the MISTIP allocation the way that we're doing it this time around is so that we have much more complete documentation of how we went through the decision-making process. So I wouldn't see that the list would necessarily go away. It could inform us going into the future.
Okay, thank you.
But to be clear, Mayor Jones and Aaron, I think if you're not on the map and approved as part of the MSTIP based on our current criteria that we've used for the umpteen years, being archived in the documentation doesn't mean anything, right? Until the criteria, because basically based on the current criteria, the county staff has reviewed the recommendation. As we saw there was quite a number of them that didn't meet the current criteria and thus were rejected. So unless the criteria changes or the status of those particular areas change, they wouldn't come into our current MSTIP plan in the future.
Correct. It would mean that the projects are not eligible for this round of the MISTIP allocation. But when we go through the next allocation, we could dust off what was proposed this time around and see if it makes sense to include it at that time.
Yeah, Yeah, that's an important clarification. Our expectation will be with each round of MSTIP, we'll be reviewing the system eligibility map and eligibility criteria going forward. And so there will be discussion with the next cycle, but that would be the cycle following the 23-28 cycle that we're currently looking to allocate.
Mayor Jones, are you done?
Yeah.
Okay, Mayor Beatty.
I had a similar question to Mayor Jones, but would like to push on instead of dusting them off for the future, making sure that the County Board of Commissioners sees the roads that were not selected, especially as we're talking about criteria. Beaverton roads got bumped off this list because they don't meet the criteria, because we think the criteria is not the best in line with what would lead to Beaverton wanting roads done. So my hope would be that you show them that those requests as well, and not wait until 2024 to bring them forward. Also, we're in an era of money coming into the state through Build Back Better and through infrastructure. And so keeping these lists out in front of people all the time is something I'd like us to do.
Thank you. We will be sharing the full list of what was proposed with the Board of Commissioners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you raise a great point, Mayor, that as there are additional funding opportunities, just having these lists of agency priorities will be helpful, just as we're trying to evaluate potential funding opportunities from other sources besides MSTIP.
Okay, Mayor Schneider.
So I first want to admit that I had to step off for a moment and came back. So I may have missed a few points, and I just want to be totally transparent about that in case someone says we already talked about that. But I do want to acknowledge and just make sure the WCCC knows that there were multiple staff members who voted against the recommendations at the TAC. And I guess I want to make sure, and I think it was both Beaverton and Tigard. And I just want to highlight and maybe emphasize what Mayor Beatty just said about the criteria, which is really driven mostly on average daily vehicle trips. And I'm going to make, I think my assessment of this situation is that using that as the primary driver in the future from a criteria perspective is going to become more and more problematic as our county further urbanizes and tries to focus density in town centers over the next few decades. I think we're using a model that maybe was good 10, 15, 20 years ago, or might have been appropriate for the type of county we were, but it's not going to be right for the reasons I just stated for Washington County of 2025, 2030, 2040.
Thanks, Jason. Councilor Rosner?
Rosner, thanks, Jeff. Just first of all, just thanking the team and the staff for putting all this together. I really appreciate it. But a quick, maybe it's an obvious question, and I apologize if I missed it. Were there any projects that met the criteria that were not recommended by staff? Just curious about that.
No, I don't think so. I think in our screening, we felt that those projects that made the recommendation list were the ones that met that criteria. And to Mayor Snyder's point, we did add in the additional criteria about whether or not it's located on the RTP bike network in order to try to reflect more than just trip counts. There's a wide variety in the vehicular trip counts. So we did add in that criteria, and it didn't end up changing the staff recommendation on that.
And then my second question is, in terms of determining the trip counts, are you using a combination of county and ODOT data for that? And can you just give us an idea of how often that's collected, and what kind of time lag there is?
Yes, we got trip counts from a variety of sources. Actually, some of the cities provided us with trip counts when they made the proposal. The county keeps track of sometimes what we get from cities and sometimes what we collect ourselves. It's done every few years, depending on the facility. And so we tried to use the most recent data that was available. Generally, I think it's probably 18, 19 counts that we have available at this time. But I'd have to look into that a little bit more specifically to get that to you if that's something you want to see.
I don't know about the rest of the team here, but we would love to see it in Sherwood in terms of the last time that data was collected for some of those roads. That would be useful information to understand.
And it's not something that we were able to use for everything either, right? So Ice Age Drive is a great example of something that doesn't exist yet. It's adopted into a plan, but it's not yet built. And so there's no counts available, but we still felt that it met the criteria because it connects two jurisdictions through a growing industrial area, through a future employment area. And so that is a facility that we felt met that criteria, even though there's no counts available for it.
And we super appreciate that out in Sherwood. My question comes from more roads, thinking about like Elwert in Edie, which recently upgraded a little bit to accommodate the high school, but is seeing increasing cut through traffic coming out of Yamhill County, trying to get over to the work centers in Hillsborough.
And I think Elwert and Edie are both already on the map.
They are on the map.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're on the map. I'm thinking about it in terms of priorities going forward for funding. So,
You've moved on to the next step of picking your projects, right? Yep, we'll get there.
thank you.
Mayor Lenahan?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Delane. And again, my apologies for jumping ahead on the last agenda. I just wanted the meeting to go a little quicker. So staff, I really appreciate the input that you've provided, but I also want to kind of echo some of the sentiment about the criteria. And one thing that I think that should be considered, not only funding equity among populations, but also among communities. For example, North Plains not being in the metro, we still will be serving a lot of, I think, some of the metro goals as far as employment and housing as we consider our urban growth expansion. And then, unfortunately, we don't necessarily have the access to the metro transportation dollars, and like so many other communities do. So, we look at this program here and, we see this as a viable program for our city. And then when I think about the other smaller cities, not in metro as well, they could also benefit from this program. And another thing that maybe to consider down the road as well would be maybe each commissioner could potentially have an allocation. And I don't know if this MSTA program would be set up that way or could be set up that way, but maybe each commissioner could have an allotment or an allocation, very much like the legislators typically do for capital dollars. And it's just a suggestion that maybe in the future consider something like that.
Thank you. I may be at your city council tonight giving the overall briefing about the program. Generally, historically, the funds have been split relatively equally between the 4 commissioner districts, which isn't quite the same as each commissioner having an allocation, but we do balance the program by the commissioner districts.
Okay. Mayor Beatty, would you be okay if I took Councilor Rippey first, since he hasn't had a chance at the apple? Councilor Rippey?
Thank you. And again, I also want to let the staff know I appreciate the presentation. I think I'm more in favor of further discussion around the criteria as well. I think I would echo some of the sentiments here, but one of the areas that we have not discussed, or at least that I can see in the documentation, is the notion of safety and how that safety wraps into the decision making. There may be projects here where there are higher incidences of crash or fatalities, and I think those kinds of things might be of benefit to consider. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Rippey. And I think, again, also maybe jumping ahead a little bit. So thinking about safety and the needs on the facility is something that we will get into when we look at the project evaluation criteria. And that's a little bit of a preview for the next probably January and February meetings, where we'll be talking about the recommended evaluation that we'll be doing for the projects that are proposed and how we rank those projects and how we prioritize them. I would envision that safety is going to be a really important piece of that, particularly as it relates to equity. So that's something we'll be coming back and talking more about. This map is just what in the whole universe of roads, arterials, and collectors wise could be eligible for the funds. And then we'll move into evaluating the specific projects.
Mayor Beatty?
And sorry, I was going to make these comments a little bit down the road, but I think this might be the right time. So I too appreciate the staff work and recognition. The amount of funding for TIP projects in this round is far more than, or far less than what we want them to do. That being said, in advance of the next round, I'd like us to have a broader conversation on the criteria for what constitutes a corridor or arterial of countywide significance. The current default is an auto-centric approach, and we keep creating lists of key corridors and arterials based on traffic counts alone, which is why when you look at the list, so many of Beaverton's projects got bumped out of it. To build a multimodal system, our plans and policies support, we should expand the view of what a map to consider land use, not just vehicle traffic. That's an important piece for Beaverton that we've talked a lot about. We need to identify those places on a map where we want to support a mixed use and consider the collectors and arterials within those areas where people walk, bike, and take transit. There are region and town centers as well as employment centers that we should ensure the region is building investments to support multimodal access to jobs. And so I think adding land use into it makes a very different criterion list. And if we were taking land use into consideration, Beaverton's projects would have jumped to the top of the list and not just trip count. And as we as a region are making this move towards pedestrian friendly corridors, that is an important criteria to add to the list. Thank you.
If this was the first time I'd heard these points, huh? Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks, Mayor. Same thing that just came through my mind, but I really am enjoying the conversation and passion on transportation infrastructure. I'm wondering for the county staff, equally just want to echo the amount of work that goes into reviewing these and in updating maps. And I think it's amazing that the county has this program to invest in our infrastructure. I don't want to jump as everyone else does in terms of criteria, things like safety, et cetera. But in terms of the PowerPoint that you shared when looking at project eligibility, I'm wondering if climate was kind of built into one of those in any way, or if that is more of a project application screening when it's closer to the dollars being allocated, or how does that fit into the process from where we are now to kind of the way that the money is administered?
That would fit into our evaluation of the projects that are submitted. So that's something that, again, I think we'll be seeing in the meetings early next year as we start to have those conversations about how we evaluate the projects.
All right, thank you, Aaron.
And since I'm filling the position now of historical reference here on this group, thinking at how many of these I've sat through, and that we can totally, and I can hear the group talking about changing the criteria. That will open it up across the region, which is fine if that's what we choose. This is our program. It was set up as one way when it was originally voter reviewed and approved, but that was also, to Mayor Beatty's point, 25, 30 years ago when it was originally set up as a major streets transportation improvement program. There was a list of projects. We're going to build these streets. We're going to make these improvements. Please vote for this debt. And that's how this all came into original being for this major streets. Jeez, just light me up today. I think one of the things we've always discussed in the past is dilution, right? There is only so much money this program generates. And if we start looking at different priorities, which this group can decide, but if we start looking at different priorities, then the ability to get some of these bigger things done also stretches out over time, right? So if we're starting to do curbs, gutters, and sidewalks in pathways, I mean, I'd add Dogwood, I'd add Heather. There's a lot more streets that Cornelius would even add because it's part of our connected community. All the stuff that tries to get people out of South County, the south part of our city, up to where there is, our one single bus route through. We'd do additions there, right? So you would see this map I think, tenfold explode in all of the region. And then there would be a question of, are we just going to put a drop in a lot of little places? Because we're still not getting everything done that there are opportunities to, right? I think Mayor Beatty talked to that. There's a lot more desire than there is money to get everything done on MSTIP. Aaron, do you guys even have a build out plan about how long, if we didn't add anything on today, could we get everything built that we've got on the map in 30 years, 40 years? Have you guys even looked at how far that build out is?
I haven't done the year's estimate. Transportation projects are unfortunately really expensive, as everybody knows, because we're all dealing with this. I think that we calculated that we can probably build 2 miles of complete streets a year with the MISTIP program, 2 miles around the entire county, maybe about 15 for the entire length of the program. And so the money really doesn't go very far, considering all the need that we have out there.
So I just give you guys that historical reference, right? That this is not the first time we've had this discussion, but that's why the group has in the past held it to the level of what you see in the criteria now. Stephen, you had something?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think a couple of, sorry, I'm
You're all
having an issue
choked
with
up
my
over
voice
this?
here. Yeah, it's very emotional. Sorry about that. Excuse me, gosh. I did want to just make a quick note. I really appreciate the comments around the priorities for what kinds of roads or what kinds of projects that we fund. And I think it's important to note that we're still a long way from sort of building out the major backbone network that we need in the county. So that historically has been the focus of the MSTIP program. And I certainly understand the shift in the way people are traveling. And we certainly expect that that will continue to evolve over time. We hope it will evolve over time. And I think that some of the types of projects that we've discussed, things that are in town centers or regional centers or that are more multimodal, will likely be quite competitive for other funding sources with additional federal funds coming around, grant opportunities, and I think even regional funding sources. So there, it's not to say that this is the only bite at the apple for those types of projects, and we certainly understand and support the importance of those kinds of projects getting funded and constructed. So we definitely want to be a partner in that effort. And again, I think it just comes back to, the sense of the priority for MSTIP. And at this point, even for this last 35 years, we still have a long way to go, but really focusing in on some of those major backbone roadways.
Yeah, the one I always joke about is 10th, right? We just got 10th done before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It was on the first MSTIP, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it took a long time for that part of the wheel to spin back around. Councilor Gonzalez, you have something?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, if I could just add one last comment, definitely recognize the lack of resources for our county and our regional system. And, this is something that the Metro Council has also heard from local electeds, and with the 2020 Get Moving measure, something that we hope to have been able to bring critical resources. That obviously was not successful, but my hope is that in the next few years we can get back together as a region and try and put some of those projects back on a list that we can get some resources for to not just do 2 miles a year. I know that'd be amazing, but when that process comes up, I'm really, really hoping that this body could be very engaged and really help us decide, what are those key corridors. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. Any other questions or comments? Aaron, do you have anything else?
Oh, we did have some next steps to talk about, which we could do, or we could do a motion if that's what the WCCC would like to do.
Board, are we coordinating committee? Are we willing to move forward with what we've got right now? And then what I've heard is we need to come back around and do a reevaluation on our criteria to see how we move forward. And I think we've also got the feedback from Aaron that all the stuff that's been added on is going to be on stuff that's presented throughout the county so folks can see these other things. I think the deficit to that is maybe, darn it, Cornelia should add a couple more things on if we were looking at a little future forecast of some of the stuff, but I think all of us would.
And just to that point, I would like to say that some of our larger cities in Washington County were the ones that really put a lot of time and effort into this with proposing a lot of streets. And that's not necessarily fair to our smaller jurisdictions that don't have time to do that. And so if it is something that we'd like to do to take this broader look, then the county would like time to be able to provide that support to our smaller jurisdictions so that we can make sure that it's really equitable and that everyone's had a chance to put forward a lot of projects. So just to throw that out there is something that if we are going to have a longer term conversation about this map before the next time we do this allocation, we'd be willing to do that.
Okay. With that in mind, are folks ready to move forward with a motion on the existing?
Jeff, I will say, I mean, I think so, but I guess I just want to reemphasize the point you just made that we need to start working on the criteria for the future soon. And we need to reframe it as many of us have spoken to today.
No, and then I've heard that as a clear message, I think, across the entire coordinating committee is this, that if this is the criteria that we move forward with for this bite at the apple, I think we understand that, but that going forward, we need to get going now so that we're not talking about this 4 years from now about, oh, what's this criteria? No, this is something you guys want to put on the coordinating and the county's work program, is stuff we've talked about towards the end of the list of what should we be working on? What are we trying to do as as our generated output from this group? Councilor Gonzalez, you had another one? Mayor Beatty?
No, that was a leftover hand from last time.
Put your hand down then.
Instead of doing it at the next break, I'm just gonna say I'm gonna vote for the list, even though it was one of my staff members that voted no, which we really applauded because she's listening to city council. And also just, the comment that we did put forward a lot of projects because it was a priority to our city that we look at this map differently, not as others that might not be a smaller city's priority, but it most certainly is ours. That's why we put them out there. So I think equity is a fair thing to say, but we wanted to make sure that you knew that this was a priority to us. So I'm going to vote forward to move this because we do know there's limited resources. We got to get things done. But man, I sure hope, to Mayor Delaney's point, we are not talking about this again in 2 years. And so I would love a commitment to the WCCC to come back and give us a roadmap to have this conversation. So right now we're voting because of the timeline. I don't want to be in the position to vote because of the timeline next time around. So I would love us to see a work plan on how we might incorporate some of these thoughts into future rounds.
Aaron, you willing to take that one on?
I would defer to Stephen saying that's okay, but I'm willing to do it.
Stephen?
Thank you. I would just say to Mayor Beatty, we appreciate your concern, and I think we at the staff level certainly understand the desire, and I think we're very interested in having that conversation. I think what we will need to do is put forward in our next long-range planning work program a specific task for the board to weigh in on, just saying that we'd like to spend some additional time revisiting sort of that system of countywide interest for future rounds of MSTIP eligibility, because I think that is a fairly weighty topic that will require a significant amount of staff resources. And given our limited resources, we'll just need to make sure that we have a board, just because of our own internal processes, have the board give us the ability to move forward and invest some staff time and resources in that project.
And I remember those meetings, Stephen. That's how long I've been doing this, since Roy's not here to make that comment. I remember us laying over tables of maps and talking amongst, oh, well, this one, but that one, but this in the future. Well, there was a lot of time with this group spent to develop the system we have now. So I think it'll be something comparable if we change the criteria. Council, Mayor Lenahan.
Yeah, thank you. I will just echo Mayor Beatty's sentiments as well. I really feel like the equity piece definitely needs to be part of the criteria, especially for smaller cities. I intend to go ahead and vote this forward with my reservations, but I still will do that just for the sake of timing. And definitely this does need to come before WCCC way in advance for all of us to be able to provide input for all of our cities and all of our roads to be considered.
Thank you, Mayor Lennon. With that, would I have someone care to make the motion?
So moved, Counselor Pace.
Motion by Counselor Pace. Do I have a second?
Second, Counselor Rippey.
Second by Counselor Rippey. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstention? Passed unanimous. Erin, you had some next steps you wanted to talk about?
I do, real quick, if we can go to the next slide. So coming up in a couple of days, we are going to have a meeting with city equity and communication staff to let them know in advance that we'll be doing a couple of different phases of public outreach around the Major Street Transportation Improvement Program. And so we'd like to be able to work with them and also learn any lessons learned that they'd like to provide us with before we move forward. So that meeting will be happening in 2 days. We're looking forward to that. And we'll bring back information from that at your next meeting as well and let you know what we heard. We'll be working to establish our technical work group. We've talked about this before, and this is where we start to come up with that project evaluation criteria. That's come up today, thinking about things like safety and climate change and equity and how we actually evaluate projects. So really looking forward to digging into that work starting soon. On December 7th, we are going to take your recommendation today to the board and ask for their action on the eligibility criteria. And then we will be in early 22 working with the WCCC and the TAC to review and start that discussion of the evaluation criteria and metrics moving towards our call for projects. So we'll be back again.
Okay. Thank you, Erin. I think that wraps up this particular topic. Let's go on to the topic 7. Metro 2023 Regional Transportation Plan Scoping.
Thank you. We have Kim Ellis from Metro is here. She's going to give us a presentation, and then I'm sure we'll be happy to answer any questions that you all have afterward. So Kim, if you're ready, and do we have your slides queued up?
You should have them. Yeah, Whitney has them. Great.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me here today. Today is an opportunity to start hearing your feedback about the next update to the Regional Transportation Plan. We're right in the early stages of scoping our work plan and engagement plan. Can you go to the next slide, Whitney? And so I'm Kim Ellis. I'm going to be the project manager for this effort, and I'm a transportation planner with Metro. And today I'm here to give you an overview of the process that we're proposing, hear your feedback about that. Also to sort of review the current policy priorities of the current plan and some of the policies that are in the plan today, but to hear what you think is most important for this update to address as we're going forward. And then also to share some of our early ideas around outreach and engagement. We want to look for opportunities, one, to know how you would, as a coordinating committee, would like to be engaged, but also how can we better engage with your communities in this process, leverage potential engagement that you're planning to do already, whether you're updating a plan or having some other public process that it would make sense to coordinate on. And then if you have other feedback that you would like to share, we're developing a scoping report and recommendations that we'll be using to develop the work plan and engagement plan that comes back to the Metro Council and JPAC for consideration of approval next March. So we are early, and there'll be numerous opportunities to provide feedback. Next slide. So just as a reminder of what the Regional Transportation Plan is, I know some of you have been part of past updates, but there are many new elected officials in the region. And so we're trying to just sort of start with some of the basic information. It's a 20-year plan. It's required under federal law. Metro staff are responsible for coordinating the update, but it's a joint document that's jointly shared by the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation and the Metro Council. So they have the approval of the final plan and meeting those federal requirements as the Metropolitan Planning Organization. It's also a document plan for the region that's required under state law and to meet statewide planning goals. And it really, its purpose is to support our land use plans with an adequate transportation system that serves all users. It does guide your local transportation plans under the statewide planning goals, and under federal law, we are required to update it every 5 years. So the last update was completed in December of 2018. Next slide. It's important for a number of reasons. One, it does guide investment and how the types of projects that we're planning and implementing for the region's transportation system to address needs throughout the region. It really sets the stage for what communities are going to look like for the future, and what are our priorities as a region for investing in a system that helps people get where they need to go, goods and services to be able to get where they need to go safely and reliably. It can serve as a way of coordinating investments at the local, regional, and state level. So some of the projects that may be funded through your MSTIP program may also receive funding from other sources, but it's really all of the pots of funding in the region are accounted for in the regional transportation plan, and it allows for more coordination across those. And in particular, it's important that in order for projects to be eligible for federal and some state funding, it needs to be on the financially constrained project list in the regional transportation plan. So that's a pretty important piece, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Next slide. This just highlights at a high level the decision-making process. As I said, JPACT and the Metro Council together share joint approval of the regional transportation plan. We have a technical transportation committee called the Transportation Policy Alternatives Committee that makes recommendations to JPACT before JPACT makes their recommendation to the Metro Council. And as I said, as a land use plan, that means that the Metro Policy Advisory Committee also has an advisory role to the Metro Council in this. So you will see me, if you're on both committees, you'll see me a lot as we're bringing information forward. But basically, there's a lot of regional discussion through these technical and policy advisory committees, in addition to the engagement that we'll be doing more broadly with others throughout the region. Next slide. This just highlights in the brown area, the planning area for the regional transportation plan. This is a boundary that's defined under federal law, and it reflects our urbanized area. So it is the urban portions of Clackamas and Washington County, Multnomah County as well, including the city of Portland. We are updating this plan to go out to the year 2045. And in which we do expect to continue to grow. Next slide. This is just trying to highlight some existing information in the current plan, but that just really shows why we do this planning at a regional level. People live and work in different communities, are traveling across the region for different reasons, as well as goods and services. And so really thinking about it as a shared regional system, and also that there are people coming from outside our region to travel to our region to important destinations. And so we're trying to think about not just the travel within the region, but also those through trips and trips that are coming from outside into the region, and how that all works together in a way that's providing options for people to get to where they need to go, regardless of how they're traveling and when they're traveling throughout the day. Next slide. And we also know that our region is continuing to grow and change. This just highlights the continued growth and diversity in our region, showing the change from 2010 to 2020. And we know that not all parts of the region share the same access to travel options. And that is something in terms of equity that we will want to continue to advance as part of this update. And we also have different needs for different communities throughout the region that we need to be taking into account. Next slide. The 2040 growth concept is the foundation. It is the adopted land use plan in the region. You have all been working in your communities since the 90s, implementing your community visions that roll up into the 2040 growth concept. It also serves as our land use element of the climate smart strategy. So the regional transportation plan is a key tool for implementing both the 2040 growth concept, but also that climate smart strategy. Next slide. This is the vision that was adopted as part of the last update. This is something that we'll be reviewing and refining as part of this update. So that's an area that we'll be seeking feedback on as we go through the scoping process and whether this vision still resonates or do we need to update it to reflect a newer updated vision for the future of our transportation system. Next slide. These are the 4 priorities that were identified as part of the last update through community engagement and the series of regional leadership forums that many of you participated in. But to highlight, and we have 11 goals that we're trying to accomplish in the RTP, but these 4 outcomes are where direction from JPACT and the Metro Council provided to really focus on advancing equity, safety, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to reduce the impacts of climate change, as well as managing congestion as 4 policy outcomes that continue to be a priority in our regional flexible fund allocation process and other grant programs that serve to implement the regional transportation plan. But this will also be something that as we're scoping this next and developing the updated plan, are these priorities still the right priorities? And are there other things that we should be also thinking about in addition to these? Next slide. The plan itself really sets a vision for a complete and connected system for all manners of travel. So whether people are biking, walking, driving, moving goods or services, or taking transit, we have a set of maps that define what the regional network is and the types of functions those different routes are serving. The plan emphasizes providing, expanding mobility options for all of these modes and making the most of our past investments. It also includes a series of policy targets, such as reducing vehicle miles per capita, also reducing greenhouse gas emissions, tripling biking, walking, and transit mode share that together are helping to achieve that broader vision and the set of goals and policy outcomes that I described earlier. Next slide. And the focus is on getting people to the places they need to go. Next slide. And expanding options for how people can get around, throughout all of our region's major travel corridors. Next slide. And this highlights the current project priorities, the financially constrained list that's in the current plan. It's almost 1,000 projects. You can see the bulk of the $42 billion in investment that was planned in the last RTP was focused on operations and maintenance of the system. So 36 billion out of that 42. But the capital projects, you can see we are investing in all parts of the system, completing important bike and pedestrian connections, improving freight access to marine terminals and industrial areas, traffic signal timing to help the arterial corridors and the highway corridors perform better, demand management programs, but then also a significant amount of investment in our roads and bridges, the throughways, which are largely the interstate system, as well as transit capital. So the Southwest Corridor, which many of you have participated in as part of that transit capital. There's an interactive map online if you want to explore the projects more, but this just gives you a snapshot of what the current plan's priorities are. And we'll be looking to update the projects and those priorities as part of this next update. Next slide. This is the overall process that we've identified. I'll walk through each phase in a little bit more detail in the following slides, but for now, we're focused on phase one, developing the work plan and engagement plan, and that work, we will be bringing forward a draft work plan and engagement plan for JPACT and the council to consider in March of next year. So right now we're seeking feedback of what that should include. And then we also need to finish and complete this update by December 6th of 2023. So that's the timeline has been to fit that process. This work is going to have community and stakeholder engagement throughout the process. So we want to hear your ideas for what that could be. Also, we will be applying Metro's racial equity framework throughout the process, both in terms of the policy development, the technical work, as well as our engagement. And it will lead to, as you can see in the teal color below, updates to the different parts of the plan throughout the process. One thing I want to highlight is next fall. That will be when we will begin updating the project list, but I'll talk a little bit more as I walk through each phase. Next slide. And before I talk about the phases, I just want to highlight the engagement approach, leading with racial equity, continuing to work to make our process more inclusive, transparent, and accessible, particularly for people who have been underserved or underrepresented in the decision-making processes, and really continuing to center our work and engagement on people's lives and experiences and the needs and disparities that people are experiencing out there today, and developing a regional plan that really helps address that meaningfully, focusing on those outcomes. Next slide. So this first phase, we're doing a variety of engagement activities to help inform that work plan and engagement plan. The briefings to the county coordinating committees are part of that. We're planning to do a series of stakeholder interviews with elected community and business leaders starting late this month and into December. We'll be hosting some culturally specific focus groups that will be in partnership with or in coordination with Metro's work to update our limited English proficiency plan. We plan to have an online survey in early next year. And then in addition to that, a community leaders forum later this week, Metro Council discussions, a special workshop of JPACT, as well as consultation meetings with resource agencies and tribes. Next slide. In the second phase, with that work plan and the updated vision and priority outcomes, that will then help inform the work we do in phase two, which will be updating the goals and objectives and performance targets for the regional transportation plan. There's also going to be significant work to bring forward updated policies for Impact, JPACT, and the council to discuss related to the regional congestion pricing study. We're in the process of updating our regional mobility policy, also policies around how can we better improve safety and make investments that are needed in urban arterials throughout the region. There's been underinvestment in those routes. And then how can we, from a policy perspective and investments, improve the region's resilience and begin advancing implementation of green infrastructure as well. That will lead to updated chapters 2 and 3 to the plan, and we'll be defining how that engagement is going to be happening as part of the scoping phase. This work will also help inform developing criteria for how we go about updating the project list in the plan as part of phase 4. Next slide. Phase 3 then will build on those previous phases and document the transportation needs from a regional perspective and disparities in that system. There will also be work. Some of it will begin in phase 2, documenting the forecast of revenues we expect to have available, but we will be bringing some policy options forward to JPACT and the Metro Council around what's reasonable for us to assume in that financial forecast for the financially constrained set of projects, because that essentially sets a budget for the projects that can be included in that financially constrained project list. And that will then lead to Metro Council and JPAC providing direction on initiating what we've termed a call for projects, but basically it'll be working with the jurisdictional partners on updating the project lists to respond to that policy direction and funding level that Metro Council and JPAC will set. Next slide. And then phase 4 is updating that list, seeking feedback on the projects that are submitted, evaluating its performance, and potentially making refinements before finalizing a discussion draft or a public review draft of the plan, project list, and other supporting documents for formal public review. Next slide. And that public review and adoption phase is the final phase, and that's anticipated to happen in the last half of 2023. As for those of you who have participated in past updates, you know that there's a lot of process there. There's a lot of regional discussion sort of at the regional table, but also the county coordinating committees, as well as public input opportunities to really weigh in on the draft plan before JPAC and the Metro Council consider final approval. Next slide. So this just highlights sort of some next steps for shaping the work plan and engagement strategy that will be much more detailed than what I've been able to present here today. But we are working through this winter to have a draft work plan and engagement plan to share and review with the committees early next year, and then have it come to JPAC and Metro Council for approval or consideration in March before formally kicking off the plan update itself. Next slide. I wanted to hit really quickly a couple of what we've heard so far from the Metro Council and JPAC. The council has really expressed their desire for this update to focus on people and values and advance Metro's commitment to racial justice, climate leadership, and resilient communities, to work towards better understanding the needs and disparities in terms of the transportation system, as well as funding of that system. And they've requested Metro staff to look to use storytelling and other inclusive engagement strategies in combination with the more traditional technical and quantitative analysis that we do to shape that. And they have expressed a desire to update the process for how we're updating and prioritizing that project list. And so those will be things that we'll be bringing forward for consideration as part of the work plan and discussion with JPAC as we are going forward. Next slide.
Kim?
Yes.
And the 1-minute summary on the other 12 slides, because we are 20 minutes into this presentation.
This is the last one before the question. I'm not presenting all of the ones that were in the packet. So, and then from JPAC, just more desire to have more robust funding discussions and really link to how we can fund think about how we can fund transportation differently to better support our climate and equity outcomes, finding a path for funding transit, bike and pedestrian connections, and just recognizing there's different needs and priorities in different parts of the region, and that the priorities of the plan be informed through that community input, as well as the jurisdictional engagement that we traditionally do. And I think the next slide are the questions coming back up for today, and want to hear your feedback on the process, the outcomes, as well as engagement or other feedback you want to provide. And I do encourage you to look at the other slides, but I do not intend to present those. They were more background in case you want to look at some more detail.
Thanks, Kim. Chris, I think you had some fodder for us to discuss. You want to throw up some of that?
Thanks. I'll just cover this briefly to try to get you started on your discussion. But I know some of you have been around before for previous regional transportation plans, so you're familiar with this. we had a good discussion at the TAC meeting a few weeks ago as well. But a couple of the items that came up based on some of the talk comments and some experience before is, and I think Kim mentioned this too, is that, JPAC is a really critical part of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Metro Council wouldn't be an MPO if it wasn't for JPAC because of the need to have local governments involved. So it's really important role, and the RTP is probably the most important role for the MPO. So it is important for all the JPAC members to have the time to really understand the regional transportation plan. It is a very thick, big document. In the past, there's been retreats for JPAC, and Kim had mentioned a workshop, but just there are times when it seems rushed. So just having plenty of time for JPAC engagement, I guess, is one thing that came up. And the other one is, as you heard from our earlier discussion, there are a variety of needs around the county and the region. So I know in the past there were big events in the convention center. And I think we've all realized the benefit of being able to see more locally the diversity of the needs within the region. So just to make sure that seems like an important thing to keep in mind. Stephen mentioned earlier about the need to complete the backbone projects in the county. Others within the region may not really realize the situation where of the need for those roads still to be upgraded from rural roads. So I think there is a benefit in just making sure that whether they're town halls, maybe in person, maybe Zoom, but something that is more decentralized so that you can really learn about the needs across the region. That was something that came up. And then the other thing is that as we've learned, those 4 priorities that JPAC agreed to have as the top 4 priority has turned out to have a really deep significance in everything, whether it's MTIP amendments or letters to the OTC. And there are actually 11 goals in the RTP. So it's really important to be able to understand all of the goals and make sure that those are, that there's really a really deep understanding. I think Kim told me that resilience, for example, is actually included as a safety measure, but we don't really talk about that when we talk about measuring safety. So there's just a lot of need to really understand and have good discussions on those goals. And some of them that have come by the wayside a little bit of economic development, certainly climate and climate adaptation are important. So, and we've already talked a lot about the toll policy and what an importance that's going to be. So these are just some comments that came up previously at the TAC and from past experiences on the RTP, just to get you thinking about your comments. And that's all I'm going to say.
Thanks, Chris.
So I don't take your time.
So committee, we're a little tight, but we got a couple other things. I think some of the agenda items near the end are going to go pretty quick, but questions, comments, feedback? This is the audience participation. There we go. Mayor Bubenik.
Just quick comment on slide number 25, that bubble at the bottom about community engagement. It's super important for us. I have pretty much a whole new city council who doesn't even probably know anything about this process. There's a lot of, as you mentioned, Kim, that there are a lot of new electeds in the area that weren't part of this 5 years ago. So as Chris was mentioning, I'm seeing that my impression is that the time frame that you have seems pretty aggressive for significant feedback from the community on this initial step, especially when you have a whole bunch of city councils that pretty much have to be brought to speed on this. So something to think about is if you're going to go out to city councils or try to get that feedback from folks out like in Tualatin and Tigard, Hillsborough that have different needs than folks in Portland. That's what's going to be super important, is getting all this feedback so this is successful. And it just seems that only a few months per phase seems a little aggressive, and to get that feedback for something this important.
Thanks, Frank. Garrett?
Thank you. I just wanted to echo a comment made by Councilor Hazy before MPAC, and I also have to compliment Kim on the presentation. I think before she's all done, she'll be able to do this in her sleep because she's been doing it a lot. But the Councilor Hazy made the point that this is the time, probably for various reasons, to think boldly and regionally. We have changes in technology. We have changes in both diversity and the need to address equity. We have availability of funding, particularly availability of federal funding that's not always available. We have to address climate change, and we still have to realize that there's a probability of a major subduction quake. So her call was to think boldly. It's it's a heavy lift, but and as Mayor Bubenik pointed out, the councils are it's going to take some effort to bring them up to speed on the needs. But thank you.
Councilor Eckville.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate the presentation, as I am one of those that is getting up to speed. And I appreciate Chris's comments about getting that community feedback and allowing for time for that. I think that the overall vision seems appropriate. This seems like a very big, exciting and important project for our area. One detail, I guess, in this process or policy, or I guess really it's more of a project categorization specifically that I just wanted to comment on and drop this now, is that I wanted to mention that the city has heard some concerns from other local governments that Metro may be considering short highway auxiliary lanes that have been proposed by ODOT to be system-wide capacity additions. And specifically, we know that those auxiliary lanes help fix a problem that might only come to light when a highway bottleneck area reaches that maximum handling capacity, and that they improve safety and traffic flow by providing for a safer, more efficient merging and exiting on our highways. So I just wanted to provide that feedback point now. But again, thank you for your presentation and for all of the work that will be coming.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that is true. We do consider auxiliary lanes as adding capacity to our system, and they are included in our regional modeling and analysis because they do carry significant trips and oftentimes are going beyond more than just interchange to interchange, but connecting multiple interchanges together. So they are considered a capacity project in the RTP and in our system analysis.
I think that would probably be a concern for our city, specifically the very short auxiliary lanes, the short segments in our system. Thank you.
And I would be remiss not to chime in on that because we've seen what an improvement 217 has made into I-5. Basically, it took a parking lot that went up past Washington Square, and all we did was do a little shoulder pavement and restriping, and all of a sudden we got something that actually can move, right? And it actually made things so instead of everybody just being parked out there, and Mayor Beatty heard me chime into her, just force all that extra traffic onto Hall Boulevard because those people are going to head south out of the county anyways. We actually got them to be moving at some kind of reasonable speed. Maybe it's 30 miles an hour, but at least they're moving on the highway instead of just parked on 217 from, basically from Allen or wherever all the way down. So I think we need to look at that. And that is one of the fourth, that is on the list, right? Is this congestion, addressing congestion. We're back up to 13 hours on 26 into Portland, right? So we're right back where we were pre-pandemic. So I think we need to look at these engineering analyses, figure out where these auxiliary lanes, because I'm sorry, the more I drive, the more I realize people are really bad at merge and diverge. And these things really make a difference in helping them. Mayor Beatty.
Yeah, I'll just comment on the auxiliary road thing, which is also why Beaverton wants us in my previous comments about we understand our roads better than anyone else. And it's not, Denny goes directly into a neighborhood and a school. and Allen goes directly into a neighborhood. And so I think we have to do a better job when we're talking about congestion, and it's not just congestion on the roads. And as we start talking about tolling and congestion pricing, it's going to force more people onto roads like 217 that are going to be forced off into neighborhoods. And Beaverton is, surrounded on two sides by freeways. And so we're not going to get away from people exiting into our city and driving through. I said that at impact as well, and for us to maintain those roads and degree of safety is an important piece for me, and bike lanes and infrastructure. And that's why we want some of this funding to do the work that we know it's the best work to do, so it could be part of the regional system. But yeah, 217 is a parking lot. Even with the auxiliary lanes, it's better, but I agree, moving at 30 miles an hour is better than no miles an hour, because like people can't merge, but they also can't slightly turn. That's the problem. The road slightly turns and people forget how to do it. So yeah, bike lanes, infrastructure, safety, all of those things are a massive concern to us. And I think we can together in this group and with Impact and JPAC and everyone else talk about pedestrian safety and vehicular safety in a different way. That would be my hope.
Thanks, Mayor Beatty. I think, Kim, the one also I'd share with you is, having been in part of this and had it, the one that was, I think, a huge eye opener to folks was those meetings when we got out of Metro and we got out of the council chambers and we went and sat in the Washington County. Clackamas County was one of them that blew us away, right? We sat in the Clackamas County and we had hundreds of people show up and give testimony. And I think that was kind of late in the process. But they gave us a lot of pragmatic testimony on what was the problems in Clackamas County. And when I sat in the downtown Portland ones, we heard things, but sometimes they were different. And when we sat in Washington County, we heard things, but they were also different, because all the transportation problems are local transportation problems. Even if you are talking about how you get to 217 or across the county, urban network or whatever, I think not having those opportunities. I mean, if we can have thousands of people show up for the Blazers game, if we can have a concert at the Moda Center, we probably need to start talking about having these kind of community things where in those ones previously we had JPAC alternates, MPAC, and Metro Council all sitting on the dais and get the feedback all together. And I think that was really high value. I found it to be a much higher value experience than all of us sitting in and listening to somebody sing Kumbaya to us down at Metro. That thing, whatever that was, whatever those things were at the forestry center and there and all that, it kind of seemed like a dog and pony in comparison to getting out, all of us out into the communities and hearing what they have to say. I think we'd be far better.
Mayor, are you referring to the transportation funding measure engagement, the community?
No.
So I'm not.
RTP, last time we did the RTP, we went out into the community. So that would have been 2016, 2017, 2018.
So those were the ones that were at the convention center, but we had community and business leaders that came.
That was sorry to say it, Kim, that was a dog and pony show. I'm talking about when we went to Clackamas County and when we went to the community center in Portland and when we went to Forest Groves auditorium, when we got everybody out of downtown and we went out in the region. I didn't get to attend all of them, but I did attend several of them.
Yeah, so I think you're thinking of the 2010 plan update, actually, because that was when we were doing some of that. So that's helpful. I just was trying to sort of focus in on what you were talking about.
It's only been 7 or 8 different plans I've been through in the last 20 years. So,
yeah.
But I would
same
suggest.
Here. Yeah, thank you.
So folks, what else do you? I think Mayor Beatty had some good feedback. How do we want to present this feedback to Metro? Chris has got a memo she's kind of put together with some skeleton stuff. Did you guys get a chance to read through that? Have feedback on that? Is that a good idea? Do we want to pull something together? Because I definitely heard the feedback that this seems like we're getting, the cart is moving ahead of the horse. Looking for feedback.
At Chris's suggestion, there was the idea of sending a letter to Metro that some of her bullet points and some of the things we've discussed today, I think would be legit. We should send something to Metro so the counselors, know what's going on, that we do have concerns about timelines and community feedback, and having the ability to get people to speed on this, given, and like I said before, a pretty aggressive timeline proposed right now.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And for lack of a better term, I almost feel like we need a boot camp for the councils, because they just don't, I don't know that they know, right? I've got 2 of my 4 are 2 years, and I don't know how many of the other councils like that. Mayor Beatty?
Yeah, I like the idea of a boot camp. Beaverton issued term limits, and 3 of us have served more than 6 years. Everyone else is relatively new. I barely remember this last time we went through this as well. And also, like, I've heard it twice, and because I have this seat and impact seat, I'm getting my opinion out there, which I think is pretty reflective of where my council is, but I think it's also important to hear from them. They have a lot of opinions that are different from mine. And, I don't want to skip over their opinion and only search for community members' opinions. Counselors are way more engaged in this kind of information than an average community member. So to me, it almost seems like we need the elected officials boot camp, and then even an understanding for the community member that starts talking about this so they know how to give feedback, because it's hard. Like, we're going to get feedback about things this plan can't do or shouldn't do or constitutionally can't do. And so I think we need to tell people and teach them how to give us feedback about this, our own councils included. It's a little bit different than what we're going to tell the general public, but I think you need to think about it in 2 camps, us and the community, and how do we educate and bring them up to speed.
Kim, did you get an earful? Chris, you got something to work with? And I got Steven, you got something
Yeah,
for us?
no, this is all very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I appreciate Mayor Beatty's comments. That was just what I was thinking, is that the WCCC may choose to send a letter to Metro, but certainly we would encourage all the city councils to get up to speed as well, and provide their own individual comment letters as well. And if there are things that I think probably certainly Metro staff, and if county staff can be of some assistance in that, we'd be happy to try to help do that. And I would really, sorry, just a time check, I would encourage us to go ahead and move on if we can to our next topic. Thank you.
Yep, I want to let Mayor Jones close us out.
Actually, I'm just noticing that Commissioner Fye is now in the attendees list instead of the panelists list.
And her hand is up.
Thank you. Yes, all right, we've asked her to rejoin as a panelist. Thank you.
Commissioner Fye?
Let's see, Commissioner Fye, can you hear us? Oh, okay, I think, well, Commissioner Fye, can you hear us?
Okay, I think we're gonna have to move on because it's
Yeah,
we got 30 minutes of stuff to cram into the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, we'll
or
keep working on
15.
our technical challenge here. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us around the corner to Interstate Bridge. Hate to say they're gonna get the short end of this stick. Hey, Ray.
Hey, good afternoon, Mayor. We'll try and get you back on schedule. I think many of you have heard from us, so we will give you a brief presentation, but really what we don't want to do is open it up for questions. So I think somebody is going to load that presentation for us. Yes, thank you. And so let me start. I'm Ray Mabey, Assistant Program Administrator for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. There are 2 of us, one that's a WashDOT employee, one that's an ODOT. I happen to be the ODOT employee. And with me is the Program Administrator, Greg Johnson. And I'll be running through the presentation, but Greg will be here to help answer questions. So I'll actually jump to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what are we here for? We're here to talk about the MTIP amendment that we are working on through Metro and JPACT. we've got the program, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program has $9 million in the previous STIP. That's actually in a planning phase. And we heard to talk about creating a PE phase and putting the funds that the commission has attributed to the program into that PE phase, and then recognizing funds that Washington Department of Transportation has attributed to the project as well. We actually are in a PE phase, and looking back at that previous STIP and working with our partners in Federal Highway Administration, I kind of believe that should have been a PE phase back then. And they're asking us to create that PE phase now and take the monies, like I mentioned before, that the commission has apportioned, the 36 million into a PE phase, create that PE phase and load that money, and then recognize the 35 million that WashDOT has. So that takes us to a $71 million amendment and a PE phase. Next slide, please. So general program overview and schedule, where are we? On your left, you'll see those previous planning efforts. The Columbia River Crossing project started about 2004 and then ended in 2014 when construction funding wasn't secured. That program did a lot of work, including a successful record of decision from our federal partners based on a locally preferred alternative that solved the purpose and need defined at the time. And we've worked with our local partners, the two ports, the two cities, two transit agencies, and two MPOs, and the two DOTs, and the community, and validated those problems or issues that define that purpose and need actually still exist. They had to do with congestion, safety, transit, freight movement, bike and pedestrian facilities, and I heard this a little early in the meeting, seismic resiliency. And so those actually exist today, and that ROD still is active. And so the program is now picked up in 2019 with the two governors signing a memorandum of understanding to kick off a new effort to solve these issues. And so we have been working with the partners to understand what work was done and what's changed. I'll be talking more about that. And as we do that, we'll get to what we call an IBR solution early next year, which will lead into the environmental process with a reevaluation, and then likely into a supplemental environmental impact statement that we would hope to conclude in early 2024, work through a final design, and get to construction late 2025, assuming we have construction funding. So that's general overview, but one thing you'll notice is that community engagement is key to each one of these efforts and is ongoing through the whole process. Next slide, please. So I mentioned what we're doing, and we're trying to understand what's changed from that previous effort. Because that ROD exists, it's a starting place. And we did work with our partners to understand where we believed we needed to be. We know that previous effort had lasted 10 years, had spent some not small dollars, and we want to take advantage of that effort as much as we can to support efficient decision-making and to extract the value of that good work. And so what we're doing is understand what has changed physically and contextually in the program area. A couple of thoughts around that are the change in use in West Hayden Island. The Port of Portland had planned to develop that side of the island, and they're no longer doing that. So that could impact interchanges, the interchange in Hayden Island. In Vancouver, we've got C-Tran that's developed a bus rapid transit system that's effective. And so that's new. So how does that impact our transit decisions and solution? So we're looking at those changes and developing design options in reaction to those changes, and then combining those into an alternative that we would bring to our federal partners for a NEPA reevaluation. But while we're doing that, we're seeking and gaining stakeholder and community input through online open houses, surveys, as well as community and equity advisory groups, as well as different working groups to get that feedback and input that's so critical. And while we're doing that, we're also centering climate and equity because we know that not only do the DOTs have those as values and center on those, but our partners in the region does as well. Next slide, please. So what are our key objectives right now? What are we working towards? We're actually working towards the pillars or the main elements of the IBR solution. What is the program going to look like? And a couple of those 4 items actually are definitive in helping shape that outcome. The interchange in Hayden Island, like I just mentioned, is it going to be a half interchange, maybe even no interchange, where you have to access the island from through Marine Drive on auxiliary bridges, or is it a full interchange? And how does it impact use on the island or the design on Marine Drive? The transit solution, what does that look like? What mode or modes is it? Is it high capacity light rail? Is it light rail, or is it bus rapid transit, or a combination? We're working with our transit partners of CTRAN and TriMet to work through the modeling to help decide what those solutions might be to move forward. And we're also looking at the number of lanes. That's a topic of I heard earlier in the meeting is how many auxiliary lanes do we need to this program? We've got 5 miles and 7 interchanges. So there's a lot of merge and weave that happens. And that's where the source of a lot of the congestion and accidents come from, is that merge and weave action and the lack of any really any lanes right now. There's just 3 through lanes and very limited ramp lengths on and off. And so what does that look like? And then lastly, the North Portland Harbor Bridge between North Portland and Hayden Island. What does that look like? We had planned to seismically retrofit that in the past. We now know that those costs are extremely high and the bridge is older, and the cost benefit of seismic retrofitting and replacing is changed. Plus we've discovered that it's very difficult to, if not possible, to seismically retrofit a bridge to full seismic standards. So looking for seismic continuity and replacing of that bridge. Next slide, please. Actually, I'm going to skip this one. It's a bit of repeat, so keep us going. Great, thank you. So here's an overview of the program area. I mentioned some of those key pillars here of the interchanges on Hayden Island, the bridge over North Portland Harbor. One thing I didn't talk about was active transportation, the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. If you've ever had a chance to ride your bike or walk or roll over the interstate bridge, you'll notice that the sidewalk that you get to use is very narrow and is impeded by the truss elements that you share with the sidewalk with. And then that is right next to traffic because there are no shoulders. So it's a very difficult place to travel on foot or on a bicycle, but it also doesn't connect through to other pathways and networks. So connectivity, wayfinding, and usability and safety are all what we're looking at in those pedestrian and active transportation solutions. Next slide, please. And we are, like I mentioned earlier, we are centering equity and climate, and we have taken intentional efforts to move that direction in creating frameworks and establishing an equity advisory group, and also bringing on the program a principal equity officer, as well as a principal climate officer to help guide and lead the program. We will be taking those frameworks and solidifying our commitments to those through screening criteria, performance measures, into the design and construction specifications to see how it actually gets done and transmits into the bridge. Also letters of agreement, and then program commitments that could be in the form of a community workforce agreement on not only what we build, but how we build it, which is just as important as we focus on process and outcomes. And then lastly, I'll take us to our last slide, I think. is people have been asking, well, what do you do in the PE phase? What does that get us? What does those additional funds do? Well, it helps us do the work we're doing today, which is working through and answering the questions of our partners in the community to get us up and through our environmental work, identify those design alternative options and select that preferred alternative, to do the public outreach, to refine the design, to do the modeling with our partners, to answer those questions and really develop a program that meets the needs of the community. And so these funds will help us move forward that, but it's not the last bite at the apple or last time you'll see us. We'll likely need some additional funds to produce through final design. We know we'll need funds for right-of-way acquisition. We also know that we'll need construction funding. And each time we'll need those, we'll be coming back through the different bodies of TPAC, JPAC, and Metro, and then talking to bodies like this as we need to have those amendments. But I guess I'd like to offer that you don't need to wait for those opportunities to see us. We'd be happy to present on the program status and updates whenever you'd like. And with that, I'd like to move us to questions because I know time is of the essence, and see if Greg, our administrator, has anything to offer after this.
No, so Ray did a fantastic job. So if we can just jump into the questions, we'll try and answer any concerns you may have. The one thing I do want to emphasize, this amendment is what allows us to go forward and answer the questions that folks are asking in regards to the IBR program. So once again, this is critically important to us in moving this program forward.
Sorry, we squished you there, Greg. Coordinating committee, you have questions, comments? Best idea ever. You're fully behind this. Give Greg and Ray everything they need.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well, yeah, Jeff, that should have happened a decade ago, though.
Right, it's only going to cost 3 times as much now. So, I mean, do you guys have questions? Do you understand? Do you have any reservations? Anything you want to ask these guys? And we can have them come back again. This is not the last time. And actually, next time we'll maybe even give them a little more time. So quiet. Everybody's ready to be done with this meeting.
That's okay. Well, we're really pleased to be in front of you today, and we'll be happy to come back in the future.
Yes.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Okay, so now only 10 minutes behind. Okay. MPAC. Do we have anybody wishing to talk about MPAC? Because I know Pete's not here. One of our Metro councilors want to talk about what's coming up on MPAC?
I think we know that there's a December 8th impact meeting scheduled, but we haven't seen the agenda at this time.
And look at that, how much time we just saved. There was 5 minutes. Okay, coming around the horn, JPAC. Okay, part of the reason we had IBR here was for folks to get a chance to see that information. That's going to be going, basically, that's part of the big questions coming up at JPAC this week, is that amendment for the $71 million to do basically the preliminary engineering work. So we've got a whole, it's like resolution agenda today. So we've got stuff coming from Gresham for 2021-22 NTIP program changes. We've got a resolution from purpose amending the 21-26 MTIP also for 82nd Safeway. Maybe the Metro councilors can help me understand, where did we get the decision to use $80 million of American Rescue Fund for 82nd Avenue, but maybe not anywhere else in the regional area?
Thanks, Mayor. I believe that those dollars were appropriated by the state legislature in the last cycle. And this is a formal amendment to recognize that. It came through I mean, I agree that the way that we fund orphan highways is fundamentally broken in the Portland metro area, and it's one of the things that we really need to figure out. And I'm hoping that this new RTP process helps us address that. But the 82nd investments came through. Representative Confam from East Portland worked really hard in a bill, and her bill got funded. So it's just kind of the way it's happening right now. And there's a match from the city of Portland for that bill as well. So there was a big, kind of like a big deal that happened with the different transportation jurisdictions that serve 82nd.
Okay, I can smell the smoky cigars already. All right, so that takes us around the corner to 5.1, which is the one we were just talking about. Is the $71 million for the bridge. Does the coordinating committee have feedback? It's going to be Steve or I in that chair. Do you have stuff that you'd want us to share about that? Do you think that's the best idea? Do you think it's a poor idea? What feedback do you have, if anything? Or do you totally understand the IBR? Hey, Frank.
As Mayor Snyder said, I mean, this has to get done. There has to be a resolution on the bridge. More power to them to get this done, quickly, and not turn this into the fiasco that it was last time. We know that the crossing needs to be fixed. Let's get it done right this time. And it's a shame it's taken this long. So I'm all for moving this thing forward and get a resolution so it doesn't take you forever to get between here and Vancouver. Even on a weekend, it's terrible all times of day. Even with COVID, the backlog, starts at the bridge and hits all the way down to downtown Portland, sometimes at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's ridiculous.
And I think to what Ray brought to us, right? I was just experiencing when I went to Washington this last week. As soon as you cross the bridge, the clouds part, and all of a sudden you just go. So it's obviously everything from the bridge down is causing the problem. Okay, good feedback. Also, we have, for the purpose of adopting
Jason
the
has to stand up.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jason. Mayor
Well,
Schneider?
I just wanted to sort of, I mean, the bridge is extremely old. What, one side's 70 or 80 years old, the other side's like 100 years old. Like it is nightmarish from an infrastructure perspective in my mind, and needed to happen a decade ago. Next best time is now. So I would say those things. I also would say that if we're gonna get involved in a lot of input and or a lot of there may be topics that require more of our thought. One of them might be, for example, what kind of public transit should be available on that bridge, for example. Like those kinds of topics, if we focus on and or bike and pedestrian, et cetera. I mean, maybe we just want to say we want it all, but I think if there's issues to discuss, it would be on the Interstate Bridge project. It would be on those kinds of things, not should the lane projects proceed. I mean, that's sort of like a no-brainer, I hope, to most people.
Well, I think the reason I wanted to bring it here for you guys to look at and see was also that this is going to be exposed to the new criteria at Metro that they've recommended significant projects be evaluated against. So it's going to get that scrutiny by Metro. That's a new addition to the process. That is not in the approved JPAC process. Okay. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that feedback. I'll share it with Steve. If he's sitting at the table, I'm not sure if it's him or me this Thursday. So the other one is the 2021 Regional Transportation System Management and Operational Strategies, replacing the 2010 Regional Transportation System Management and Operations Plan. Not to be undersold, and we're already over time, Resolution 21-5209 for the purpose of providing concurrence to ODOT to seek direct allocation of federal transportation funding under the revenue loss provision for the coronavirus impacts. So that's the stuff there. That was the JPAC update. Other business and agency updates. Do we have any we need to get squeezed in here? We're already over time.
Chair, I would just mention our next meeting will be Monday, December 13th. Just a reminder for everyone.
should already be on our calendars.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I think for the good of the order, unless there's something else, we need to close. And I also did not make it early again this time. I'm gonna have to work on it.
Thanks everyone for hanging in there.
Thanks, everybody.